Ilium by Dan Simmons, book review. Okay, so there I was walking through the bookstore. Now, maybe some of you other bookish people can identify with this. You've got 10 books at home that you're reading, and you're like, okay, I've got too much on my plate. I'm not going to buy another book. But you go into the bookstore just because you love browsing and just kind of seeing what's there. And then you pick up a book and you're like, oh, I absolutely have to start reading this. And then even though you promised yourself you wouldn't buy another book, you end up buying it. And yeah, that's what happened with me. I never heard of this book before. I was just browsing in the bookstore, picked it up, and I thought, yeah, I've got to get this. Now, this is a little bit confusing, or it was confusing to me. This is a big, thick book, and it's actually only half the story. It's a two-parter, so there's Ilium and Olympus. But you can't really say that one is a sequel to the other, because really it's just kind of all one complete story. So it's like one big book split into two parts. And yeah, here's my first complaint about it. At least with the editions I was looking at in my bookstore, the publishers did not make this clear at all what's going on. So I spent it was obvious that the books were connected in some ways, but it was not clear which book was the first one and which book was the second one. I don't know, maybe different editions have kind of made this clearer. Anyways, Ilium is the first half, and then you have to buy Olympus the second half to figure out what's going on. This book review is only going to be about Ilium. So, the reason I felt like I absolutely had to buy this book is because as I was leafing through it, it turns out this book is a retelling of the Trojan War stories with kind of aliens and robots and dinosaurs thrown in. And I was obsessed with the Trojan War as a youngster. I was really into the Trojan War stories, read like tons about it, loved the Iliad. At one point I was studying classical mythology in college, but then I changed my major like everyone does these days. You know, you change your majors like 5 times. But yeah, I've always been really interested in the Trojan War. So when I found out that this was a retelling of the Trojan War story, I was like, oh boy, this sounds really interesting. And just kind of leafing through it, I could tell like Dan Simmons had really good prose. Like it seemed like it was really exciting to read. So I bought it, and yeah, here's the review. So, what's going on? The Trojan War is happening again. So, it already happened once, 3,000 years ago, but now it's happening again in the distant future. And there's Thomas Hockenberry, who's a 20th century classical scholar. Now this book takes place in the future, so Thomas Hockenberry lived in our time, died, but he's been resurrected by the Greek gods to go and watch the Trojan War happening a second time and just take notes about whether or not everything matches with what happened in the Iliad. So what is going on? Why is the Trojan War happening again? Who are the Greek gods? Well, I mean, like, what are they doing in the future? Why do they need Thomas Hockenberry, a 20th century scholar, to watch the Trojan War and kind of check to see if it matches with what's happening to the Iliad? I don't know, because none of these questions are answered in the book. They're all teased, but yet, you know, you've got to buy the next book, Olympus, and figure out what's going on. Now, actually, I've only given a small part of the plot because the Trojan War sections are only about maybe a third of this total book. There's also like a lot of other subplots going on. There's little green men from Mars. There's these characters called post-humans. Also, Shakespeare's Tempest, you know, like the characters from Shakespeare's Tempest are out there somewhere in this universe doing something. I'm not sure what to make of it, and I'm not sure how it's all going to fit together. It's either really genius or it's really ridiculous. And I'm going to have to wait till the final book to see how it all fits together. It's somewhere on the line between genius and ridiculous. I don't know. I was reading some reviews of this book online, and people are praising it highly. Some people are, for incorporating all these themes from classical literature. And yeah, I mean, the book does get some credit for that if you're kind of a mythology geek like I am. But I'm not sure we should give it too much credit. Because I think you can't just kind of take all this different stuff and mix it together and call it a great work of art. Great work of art is more than just mixing stuff in a blender. And I think sometimes people in geek culture give a little bit too much credit to things like anime or books like this for just referencing classical literature. I don't know. I'm going to have to withhold judgment until the final book. Okay. The good news is, it's fun to read. Kind of whether this ends up being great literature or not. Mostly. I've got some complaints I'll get to later. Now, for my money, and again, I'm somebody who bought this book solely because of my interest in the Trojan War. The best parts of the book are when they're retelling the Iliad, when they're going over the Trojan War again. Now, it's not a new story, it's a retelling of the Iliad. But, you know, the action in the Iliad is pretty intense. Unfortunately, the Iliad is not accessible unless you have a modern translation, because the original Iliad is written in an old style. But Dan Simmons is retelling it in a very kind of vibrant modern style that's just kind of adding all the action that was already in the Iliad and, giving it a really interesting modern retelling. In these sections on the Iliad, you're seeing it through the eyes of the scholar Hockenby. So he's reporting what he's saying, and at the same time he's comparing it in his mind to what happened in the original Iliad, and he's thinking about the significance of it. So it's like reading the Iliad, but having like a classical professor at your elbow, kind of saying, oh, don't forget this part is really cool, or this is the significance of this part. Dan Simmons also updates all the language. So they're talking in modern English, all the characters from the Iliad. It mostly works. There are some sections where he's trying a little bit too hard to make it modern. I'll give you an example. This is a quote from the book. This is Helen of Troy talking to Hector. So she says, "My dear friend, my dear brother, dear to me, bitch that I am, vicious, scheming cunt that I am, a female horror to freeze the blood." I don't want Helen of Troy to say bitch or cunt. It just pulls me right out of the story. It's too modern. But aside from that, it's mostly really good, the retellings of the Iliad. The problem is, the parts that deal with the Iliad are only a third of the book. The rest of the book has all these other plots going on. And I think they're not nearly as interesting as the original Iliad. Whenever we started going off and to explore another plot, I was like, no, go back to the Iliad. I want to know more what's happening in the Trojan War. But yeah, the 2/3 of the book is just kind of other stuff. There's a lot of techno-babble with kind of some of these technologically advanced civilizations. Wikipedia, at least the last time I checked, classified this as soft science fiction. I don't know the difference really, but there is a lot of techno-babble, but there's no, it is just babble. It's just like watching Star Trek. You don't actually need a degree in engineering to follow what's going on. It's just babble. Now, yeah, again, to repeat what I said earlier, everything in this book is a mystery. It's not clear what is happening or why, and there are like so many mysterious parts. Now, with any book like this, you've got to kind of keep the mystery going, like tease it out a little bit and just give out a little bit of information. From the author's point, I'm sure it's difficult to do this effectively and to do it seamlessly. Dan Simmons doesn't quite do this seamlessly. For example, there's a character in this book called Savvy, who's 1,400 years old, and you get the impression she knows exactly what's going on. But she's just too grumpy to kind of explain it all. She's like, we don't have time to talk about it now, or I don't want to talk about it. And so like she just makes these cryptic remarks, but she doesn't explain what's going on, which is kind of silly. Like you get the impression that if Savvy would just sit down and tell everyone what's going on, we could like make this book a lot shorter. On the other hand, I mean, what do you expect? Characters like Savvy are just a part of this genre. You know, kind of lots of stories have kind of an old character who knows what's going on, but just kind of doles out the information very slowly to increase the suspense. What's a little bit more ridiculous is that they have these little green men from Mars in this book. And the little green men also know everything that's going on. But communicating kills them. Like if they give out information, that act of giving out information just kind of saps so much information from their body that then they fall over dead. So these characters can only kind of get pieces of information out of the little green men before they fall over dead. And I thought, oh, that is so stupid. Well, I don't know. It's one of those things that's kind of so stupid, maybe it's clever. I don't know. Maybe Dan Simmons is making a satire on ways that authors will try and kind of tease out information to the readers. I don't know. Okay, I'm going to move on to the nitpicking section of this review. Now, as I said at the beginning, I was obsessed with the Trojan War and classical mythology as a youngster. So these are all the nitpicks and inaccuracies that I caught. Okay, inaccuracy number one. At one point, one of the characters is talking about the Rape of Cassandra and says that it was Ajax the Greater. That's not right. Ajax the Greater was dead by the time of the Rape of Cassandra. It was Ajax the Lesser that raped Cassandra in the original Trojan War story. Now, the difference between Ajax the Greater and Ajax the Lesser is an easy thing to mix up. I suspect Dan Simmons probably knew this, and it was just a typo. But, yeah, who was proofreading this thing, huh? Somebody dropped the ball at the publisher's house with this one. Okay, speaking of the Rape of Cassandra, Rape of Cassandra actually happened after the Iliad, of course, during the fall of Troy. All the information we got from about the fall of Troy does not come from Homer, comes from some of the other more minor poets. Or I don't know, actually there are some flashbacks in the Odyssey. I don't remember, do they talk about the Rape of Cassandra in the Odyssey in one of the flashbacks? Maybe they do. I don't remember. Because like that was the thing that kind of set off the gods being mad at the Greeks and the whole... okay. A point being, actually, it's never clear how much authority the other poets have. The Hockenberry is there to only observe what's going on and compare it to the Iliad. But then he's referencing to events that happened before or after the Iliad. And it's like, okay, is the Iliad in this universe, what are the authoritative sources on the Trojan War? That's not clear. Another point, they make a big deal out of describing Achilles' armor, particularly, his big famous shield. But Achilles only got this shield after the death of Patroclus. And in Ilium, the parts of the Iliad they're talking about so far, Patroclus hasn't died yet. So what is Achilles doing with this big shield? Okay, another thing. In one of the different subplots, there are two robots. One of the robots is a huge Shakespeare expert. He knows everything about Shakespeare and he's obsessed with Shakespeare. But he's talking to the other robot, and the other robot is talking about Odysseus and the Trojan War. And the robot, who's this huge Shakespeare expert, doesn't know anything about Odysseus and the Trojan War. And I thought, but Shakespeare wrote a play about the Trojan War. And in Shakespeare's play about the Trojan War, Odysseus was one of the characters in that play. So if this robot supposedly knows everything about Shakespeare, he should at least know about the Trojan War and the character of Odysseus. I mean, he might not know the details of the Trojan War myth that are outside of Shakespeare. I don't know. Those are all the nitpicks I could catch. Quite possibly there's more in here that I couldn't catch because, it's been a few years since I was in school. If anyone else caught any more nitpicks or inaccuracies, or if I nitpicked this wrong, just let me know in the comments. So that's all for this one, and then I'll hopefully be coming back with my review of Olympus.